So hello everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Jonathan Coyle. I'm the Head of Marketing for Lawyer Checker. Before I start getting into specifics around today's webinar, email spoofing and the OnDMARC protocol, I wanted to take the opportunity to share with you something that I found the other day that's going to hopefully put into context the threat, the growing threat that we're facing today in regards to cybercrime. So I'm just going to pull up a web page called Fortinet, and this is a threat map of all in real time, all ongoing recorded cyber attacks. So you can see lots of lines pinging about, with plenty of them heading towards the United Kingdom. There's plenty of these happening every day, a huge amount of them, and that's quite frightening, if you ask me. So taking that into account, I can tell you now, if you haven't already been hit in regards to feeling the adverse effects of a cyber attack, I'd be willing to make a bet, and I'm not a betting man normally, that within the next 5 years, the probability is you will experience the adverse effects of a cyber attack, whether that is against you directly, yourself, a colleague, one of your clients, one of your suppliers. This is not a case of if it will happen, it is a case of when it will happen, unfortunately. So back to the presentation, and hopefully I haven't made you all too anxious sharing that. But I'm here to talk to you today about specifically email modification fraud. So that was a summary of all cyber attacks recorded globally, but I'm talking specifically today about email spoofing, a certain type of cyber attack. And why am I talking about email spoofing? And that's because relevant to us and to you as law firms or legal professionals, the SRA has stated in their risk outlook that out of all of recorded cyber attacks last year, 60% of those that were reported were email modification fraud. So what does that tell us then as lawyers? It's that we've identified that email is our biggest concern in regards to cyber attack. It is our biggest threat. It's the thing that we should be most worried about. So I'm going to talk about some of the different types of email impersonation and modification fraud. I'm planning on convincing you, I will convince you, that the following types of answers to the question of what you're going to do, what you're currently looking at in regards to email security are not good enough. Things like we're too small a firm to be targeted. We always tell our clients not to communicate things like bank account details via email. It doesn't have to be bank account details, it could be any client confidential information. It's handled by our IT security system, and firewall protects our network, so we don't have to worry about it. Or we know we should be doing more about it but haven't got around to it. These are the things I'm going to be talking about, why they are simply not enough. Okay, so moving on. We have a couple of different ways that we could describe or categorize a spoof email. A pretty basic way of categorizing those is splitting it into those that are targeting you directly, and they can be made to look like they're coming from you yourself or someone within your firm. Or we have those sent to third parties purporting to be you. So a spoof email apparently from you sent to clients, suppliers, or any other third party. Here is a list showing some examples and the potential losses of those. So we've got the obvious one of financial loss, but also things like the loss of data, which could be company confidential data or client confidential data, and the subsequent effects of, specifically in the case of company confidential data loss, that leaked data could result in a more comprehensive breach, such as gaining direct access to some of your internal IT systems. If that data included things like usernames and passwords to accounts. So I'd like to stress here that financial loss isn't the only danger. It's potential data loss and any subsequent reputational damage that may have that are particularly important as well, that I think that we don't often worry about as much. And I'll talk a bit later on why we need to. So the email modification fraud that's targeting you. I'm going to use an example of a scenario where you're targeted directly. I could probably list off quite a few different cases of financial loss from typical things like CEO fraud, such as an email sent to a legal assistant or a payments department saying, please pay this invoice. And it might apparently come from this senior partner, managing partner of a firm. But I found a really good one on the SRA's Risk Outlook, which covers loss of company confidential data, and hopefully it puts into context why that's equally as important. So if I read through the case, a large law firm's HR department received an email from a senior exec asking for staff payroll information. They then responded with the details that that executive asked for, which included names and financial information. A short time later, some employees of that firm began reporting that they'd been victims of identity fraud. The firm looked into it and found that a large proportion of their staff had been targeted. And after investigation, they learnt about this email that was sent to the HR department, and that it had not, in fact, been sent from the executive named, and it had been a form of CEO fraud, which was a phishing scam. Now imagine the impact to your firm if 20 staff members walked into your offices who've all been victims of identity theft as a result of a breach via email impersonation from the business that they work for. I couldn't imagine what effect that's going to have on things like morale, particularly if any of them should decide to sue, which, as I understand, is something that they'll be able to do under GDPR. It could be the case that you're the firm's looking at multiple cases against them, and it's worth noting that once this data's out there, it's not the case that it just be necessarily used once. It could be used over and over again. So the impact of that is going to be quite huge. It could potentially cripple a firm, I'd imagine. So yeah, that's a good example that I think often people overlook. And then moving on to targeting third parties. So this is people pretending to be you and talking to people like clients, suppliers, or any other third party. So clients, as an example, this is something that we're all probably quite familiar with, and that's rife, particularly within residential property law and conveyancing. And that's normally based around diverting funds to a fraudulent account. But it could be impersonating you and gaining any confidential information from a client. It's equally applicable to, let's say, a commercial law firm who have a large business client. A criminal gains confidential information from them while purporting to be you. So that's another good example of that type of approach as well. The supplier, they could impersonate yourself and gain account and password details to online services that you subscribe to. They could then subsequently use that to try and guess account details for other internal accounts that you use, maybe a case management system or email accounts or anything like that. And then any other third party. The list's endless there, really. Somebody could, impersonating your email, send a compromising statement or press release or any type of information to a third body. So imagine a compromising statement or press release sent to something like a press publication, which they then decide to run with. It might say that someone within the business has resigned, a managing partner. The reputational damage of that is equally as important as things like financial and data loss. So now I come back to those two different types of email spoofing and the things that we do to try and prevent it. So for those that are targeting you directly, what do? We try and train staff to be really vigilant and check things like email sources, domains that the emails are coming from. We'll question important requests, requests for important data that are made by email. We'll try and authenticate those via the phone. So a particularly good example of that is refusing to or advising against communicating things like bank account details over email. Within residential property, it's using things like lawyer checker products to safeguard particularly things like client funds within transactions. So those are things I think we're all aware of that we should be doing more to try and prevent these attacks targeting you. Now for targeting third parties, for these we rely on any recipient of an email purportedly coming from us to do all of those same things, and then ultimately saying if anything bad should happen, sorry, but you should have probably checked with us first prior to taking any action that ended up being compromising. Or if it's affected you adversely, coming down on them like a ton of bricks saying, why didn't you check with us first whether this was legitimate? Now that's a clear reason why we should be doing more, but I'm going to discuss why now that those things just simply aren't good enough. And it's because there's different levels of sophistication when it comes to things like email spoofing, and I'm going to go over them now. While I do that, I'm just going to play a short, press play on a short 3.5 minute video that's publicly available on YouTube. You don't have to pay attention to it, and I'll come back to it later. But let's take number one. This scenario is someone buying a domain with a vaguely relevant keyword or word to what you provide. So this example is a bank, HSBC, and they've bought a domain of @yourbank.com. And then they create a username prefix with probably your brand in it, so HSBC. Now, this is, well, it says they're obviously suspicious, but unfortunately, people do get caught out with this level of spoof email all the time. Number two is someone buying a very similar domain to yours, and in this case, someone's bought hsbo.com instead of HSBC, and there's the added benefit for them that the O and the C are quite similar, and on first looks, it's quite hard to tell if you're glancing at it. So that's a little bit harder to spot, but still doable. But three, what if it's a completely genuine email domain? So a genuine email that exists, info@hsbc.com, that if it was spoofed, what is identifiable from receiving that to the recipient that shows that it's fake? Unfortunately, if it's an exact match of a domain, nothing. Probably to the extent where it could well fall into any previous email conversation history as well. The video that's been playing that's now nearly 2 minutes through shows exactly how to hijack someone's exact email domain. It's really, really easy. We've got an IT team at Lawyer Checker with some members ranging from 6 months worth of IT experience to others who have got 10+ years within IT, and I can tell you all of them can do this. And yeah, like I said, that publicly available video shows you how to do it. That's quite scary. What does it mean? Unfortunately, it means that an email sent this way that is fake and impersonating you can't be identified by the recipient alone. They can't check the source and identify that it's fake. Anybody can do it. It's a YouTube video away from being able to exploit, use this exploit. And suddenly, that person's able to communicate to the entire world as you, effectively. The key thing for me, though, is that the criminal isn't just fooling the recipient that they're compromising. They're compromising a weakness in the sender's email domain, not just the recipient not checking it properly. Essentially, with this compromise present with your email domain, a firm or business is pretty much saying to everyone it deals with, clients, suppliers, whoever it is, that ultimately they're not safe to do business with while they're relying on email communications to deal with them, simply because they can't trust an email from you to be legitimate. That's a massive issue. That's a massive problem. I mean, we might be asking ourselves, why does this exist? It's unfortunately because email's been around for quite a while, and the security protocols for SMTP, it just wasn't really considered in light of modern day cyber criminals and what we're facing today. For those with at least a vague idea of mailboxes and how they're set up, there was what is called SPF and DKIM records, which are separate security protocols that were introduced around 2004. And they're very clunky to set up, they're hard to implement. They actually work independently from each other. And the important thing is they don't actually do anything to prevent an email being delivered based on the things that they actually look for. So what does this mean? As a brief summary, a hacker, someone that's watched a 3.5-minute YouTube video, can suddenly be able to communicate with the world or directly to you as your own firm, your colleagues, as yourself. It's using a weakness within your system. It's not just relying on a recipient not checking if a dummy email that looks a bit similar. In my opinion, in the case of a client transferring funds to a fake account off the back of an email from you using this method, I can't understand how the firm can't be found in some part liable, particularly when there is a way to prevent it. So how do you stop it? Well, there's email security solutions such as services like Mimecast and Message Labs. My understanding is that they can be set up to help prevent those emails that are targeting you, the ones that are coming in at you. What they won't be able to do is stop those that are targeting those third parties that are hijacking your email. There's only one way to be sure of this, and that's to implement something that's called OnDMARC. So OnDMARC, which was ratified in 2015, a couple of years ago, it uses those previously mentioned security protocols, SPF and DKIM, and it aligns them together. So DKIM, which verifies the email has been signed by the same domain that it was sent from, and SPF, which verifies that the email is sent from an authorized sender, and it aligns them. Importantly, it provides the action in either allowing that email to be delivered or prevent it from being delivered. DKIM was pioneered by PayPal, Yahoo Mail, and Google, some of the large tech companies, to combat this exploit. So who's using it? Well, in 2015, Gartner had something called a Magic Quadrant for secure email gateways. And that's basically a fancy way of saying there were 4 things that they identified a business could do that required them to be considered a leader in email security. OnDMARC was one of those 4 things. In 2016, the UK government mandated DMARC for all government sites. So there's a little GIF on the side on the government website detailing the use of DMARC to secure government email. Some of you may remember at the time of that happening a news story where Ed Tucker, who is the head of cybersecurity at HMRC, and Ed recorded that they managed to prevent 300 million phishing emails being sent from them, reportedly from them, by implementing DMARC. And then last year in 2017, Homeland Security mandated all US federal sites implement DMARC. Yeah. So how does this fit in with Lawyer Checker? We've introduced a product to our suite called OnDMARC. This allows a business to correctly set up and manage DMARC on all of their webmail services. If any of you or anyone in your firm that is concerned by anything that I've gone over today, please get in touch. Forward a recording of this webinar maybe on to the relevant person within your firm so we can help prevent future exploits of your email domain. This is typically where I'd ask for questions. However, today we're going to be taking all the questions that have been asked within the webinar, and we'll get back to people at a later date with those. So instead, I'm going to ask a question of you, and that's: does anyone listening today think that their email domain is secure from this type of attack, or are you unsure? Do you not know? I asked this question as we'll be following up this webinar with an email sent to attendees. There'll be a link. We'll invite you to give us consent to demonstrate how easy this is to do, and we'll attempt to spoof your email. So look out for that follow-up email and that link in there if you'd like to put us and your email domain to the test. So yeah, great. That's about it, I think, for the webinar. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.